So this video is going to be on absolute value inequalities. One of the videos is going to be on less than, and one of them is going to be on greater than. So how I remember this is that you're still working with compound inequalities, so and or statements. So when you're looking at less than, I always kind of exaggerate the than, so less than or than. So it's the and statements. So we're going to look at those first. Less than is and, okay? So when you're solving for this, you always have, for absolute value, you always have to make two equations. So if you see a less than or a less than or equal to symbol, it's always going to be an and statement. So I'm automatically going to put my and in the middle. So my first equation, so I'm not going to include the inequalities anymore. I'm going to have it so it's x is less than 2. Then my next equation is always going to be, the sign is going to be flipped, and you're going to make this number the opposite. So for example, it's going to be x is greater than -2. So because it's an and statement, it also could be written differently. So it would be -2 is less than x, which is less than 2. So it also could have been written this way. All I did is I put this number in front, flipped the sign, and I have x in the middle, and now that's how it would be written. But you don't have to write it like that. So if I were to graph this, I would have x is less than 2, so it's an open circle. And then I would have x is greater than -2, so that would be open circle. And because I need numbers that are less than 2 and numbers that are greater than -2, I would have my and graph. So my interval notation would be -2, comma 2 with parentheses on both sides. Now, when you're solving inequalities and graphing solutions, you always have to get the absolute value by itself before you can make your two equations. So right now I have my absolute value plus 8 is less than 12. So I know it's an and statement, but I have to get this absolute value by itself before I can start graphing and solving. So I'm going to subtract 8 on both sides. So I'm left with the absolute value of x is less than 4. Now, because I have the absolute value is less than 4, I now can make my two equations. So I'm going to get rid of the absolute value now. So I have x is less than 4 and x is greater than -4, because I always make it the opposite. I flip the sign and make it the opposite. So it also could have been written as -4 is less than x, which is less than 4. That is an and statement. It still means the exact same thing. So I need numbers that are less than 4, which would be this way. And I need numbers that are greater than a -4. They're both open circles because they're just less than and greater than symbols. So I am going to draw my graph right in the middle because I want all of those numbers that are between those two. So my interval notation is going to be -4 parentheses, comma 4 parentheses, because I'm not including those two numbers, but I want all the numbers that are between that. So for example 2, I know I need to get the absolute value by itself before I can make my two equations. So in this case, I have 8 times the absolute value of x plus 4 is less than or equal to 8. So my first step is I got to get rid of that 8 because it's in the way of having my absolute value by itself. So I'm going to divide the entire thing by 8 on both sides. So I'm going to have the absolute value is x plus 4 is less than or equal to 1, because 8 divided by 8 is 1. Now the absolute value is by itself. I know that you have an x plus 4, but that's within the absolute value. So I know right now that everything inside the absolute value is by itself. So now I can make my two equations. I have x plus 4 is less than or equal to 1, and x plus 4 is greater than or equal to -1. So I always make one positive, one negative. And then I flip the sign of the second equation. So I'm now going to solve. So I've subtract 4 on both sides. So I have x is less than or equal to a -3, and x plus 4 is greater than or equal to negative 1. I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides. So I have x is greater than or equal to negative 5. So in this case, I could write it, so I want the least number. So I have negative 5 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to negative 3. That would make sense because it's least to greatest, but you don't have to convert it to that. You could just leave it as this. And now we have a closed circle on negative 3, a closed circle on negative 5, and we want all the numbers that are greater than negative 5, which would be this way. And I need all numbers that are less than or equal to negative 3, which would be that way. So my interval notation would be a bracket, negative 5, because I always read left to right, comma, negative 3, bracket.